All right, y'all, welcome back. It is the journey through the book of Colossians, and we are pushing through as we've covered chapter 1, chapter 2, and the first half of chapter 3. A few things to remember. Today we are going to look at Colossians 3, verses 12 through about 17, and we're going to cover Paul's emphasis on... Last week, he said, maybe let me give you a little refresher. So you have the overarching theme of Colossians, which is one part is here are theological things that you need to know, like this is your theology proper. And then here are theological things that you need to do. This is how you live that out. This is the practice of your theology. This is how we as Christians, as followers of Christ, live into the things that we think. Chapter 3 really begins the live into, and last time we talked about all of the things that we take off, be that the anger, the rage, the malice, the shameful, disrespectful words, the lying, and the whole sexual ethic code of sexual immorality and impurity, and all of those things eventually lead towards us coveting or desiring what is not ours. And this week, we get the positive side. If last week was the negative side of here are the things that you need to take off, just like... I go to the gym in the morning and I wear a shirt and a sweatshirt and some shorts and some pants and socks and all that stuff. I come home and before I shower, I take all of those things off, put them in the dirty clothes so that I can shower, be clean, and put on the new clothes. That is where Paul is using this metaphor of you need to take off these things. And he even says so far as put them to death. Now, after putting those to death, taking off the dirty clothes, so to speak, you need to clothe yourself with something that is good. And how do you get dressed in the morning? And he gives us this sort of info. So, I will make sure that there is a card up top that lets you know the Colossians study if you haven't covered the other ones. We are in, part 8, part 9, something like that. And then I will pop up on the screen right over here the screen capture just for going through on the biblical side of things, just BibleGateway.com. And today we actually might use a little more of the Greek from, I use Bible Hub. It is the easiest that gives you all an interlinear so that you can see kind of the broken apart and we can look through some of the dictionary lexical stuff and all of those things. So, a little coffee and we are off. Here we go. Verse 12, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves, pausing there. Therefore, of course, is there for a reason, the whole tagline back and forth. But the idea is, if you have taken off the old things, now, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, you need to clothe yourself. You need to put on clothes. And here I'll jump into the Greek side of things. Let me get to our verse here. 10, 11, 12 is coming. Here we go. Put on, therefore. The very first word in the Greek is put on. Now, in the English, we put it later, but here the emphasis is you took something off. Putting on is of vital importance. Did I say vital importance? You should understand that this is Paul's exclamation point underline. Putting on, therefore, as, and here you get the word ekletoi. Ekletoi is the same word that has a root of ecclesia, the called out ones. And so the English gave us in the NIV chosen ones. Here you can see that this is God's elect. These are God's people. This would be a little earth-shattering, not to us as Christians in the modern day, but to those following after Jesus in the first century, because God's chosen ones, God's elected people, were only the Hebrews up until this point, or at least it had only been revealed to the Hebrews. You can actually see that God's plan was for the Gentiles all throughout the prophets. And here we see God's elect people. This should ring back to when he brings this up earlier in the chapter. And he, of course, holy and beloved. We get, you are holy and dearly loved. I like beloved. Dearly loved is really the connotation, but beloved has a little more personalization that this is, maybe I like it just because when I was going through seminary and stuff, and my gramps, I would listen to him preach every once in a while. He didn't preach much at that point, but he liked the phrase beloved, that you are the beloved of Christ, that you are something set apart and special. That is what Paul wants them to know, is put these things on because you are something special. And then he comes in and says the first thing you need to put on is compassion. Now, if you follow along in the sermons, I tried to kind of dissect these from the Greek language so that you could get a fuller aspect of what these were, with some illustration, putting some pictures on, kind of showing you like clothing. But here, when you are getting dressed, you are putting on compassion. If we go back to the Bible Hub, here we see hearts of compassion. Maybe I'll go here and I'm gonna have to do a whole bunch of things. I'm not gonna do it. I'll just tell you that oftentimes this is translated as hearts of compassion in many translations. The NIV just chooses compassion because what I can show you here is they have it as hearts. I'll put it at the top here. Splenka. That they have it as hearts, but if I click right here on the thing, you can see that this is not the word for hearts. This is not the word for heart at all. It can be used as heart, but the real translation here of the word is that intestines or bowels. And so I think that conveys a little bit more, that as we look at it, you can see here, bowels. Oh, I jumped back. Let's keep on going. Why are they putting these ads on here? So you have bowels of compassion. And compassion here is our translated word. The idea is really mercy or pity. And not pity in the negative sense, but tenderness. The idea is that there is something deep down inside that conveys this. And the thing that I really like about Paul in this situation is we get compassion as the word that we're supposed to put on. And what he does is he goes into the inner workings of the person to say that these are things that you put on, metaphorical clothes, but also things that are down inside of your guts, that you should be people that have bowels of tenderness, and not so much like you have irritable bowel syndrome in the modern context, but that from the idea that we know now that the vast majority of your neurochemical makeup, the way that the neurons and stuff connect within your brain between dopamine and norepinephrine and all of the different things, serotonin, all of those, that a lot of that actually is manufactured through your intestinal system, from your stomach down through your colon, that you have a microbiome in there that help kind of process things. That this is why we say we have a gut feeling. A gut feeling is something that deep down inside, you just, I don't know. Here, deep down inside, there is tenderness, mercy, compassion. So you have taken off the malice, the anger, the rage, the immorality and impurities and all of those things. Now when you are putting on, deep down inside should be a tenderness and a mercy. The next word that we get is kindness. So you should clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness. Here, when we look at kindness, the best illustration of kindness throughout the scripture And this really comes more from the Hebrew and God's loving kindness, and it would be more chesed from the Old Testament. But here, when we look at kindness, often in the modern ways, we think of nice. That when people are nice, they are kind. But nice and kind are different, especially biblically speaking. Because kindness in the Old Testament is beautifully illustrated by David and Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth. And that one is just amazing. If you haven't read that, go and find it. I can't remember the reference of which of the Samuels that's in. 2 Samuel something, I would guess. That Mephibosheth is the grandson of Saul. I think he was related to Jonathan. I don't remember if that's 100% correct, that he was Jonathan's son, or maybe he was Saul's son. Anyway, Mephibosheth. When the area gets attacked, the nurse picks him up, and somehow he ends up where his both feet are lame by the time he gets older. And so a speculation would be that they pick him up, they drop him, and in the dropping that there was some sort of paralyzation that happens in his neck, and so his legs don't work anymore. And so David goes, and who can I show kindness to? And he shows kindness to Mephibosheth and restores him to the honor of the anointed family, so to speak, and lets him dine at his table and gives all of Saul's land back to him so that he can have a way to provide for himself. He gives him all sorts of servants to carry out those duties. And the idea behind this is, I will go into the Greek again so that you can see this. Kindness, gentleness, goodness is kind of what they give you. But here, notice, usefulness. Usefulness is the root. When you get to the root, it is useful. Think of David restoring usefulness to a person that probably was deemed unuseful, that he was a burden to many. Now he is useful. That as we approach things that look to being people of kindness, kindness is rooted in something that brings use, that brings practical functionality, that we could even say that there is a level of service within that it is not just being nice. That here we find, if we are to be kind people, that kindness should bring use, restore use to others around us. Okay, the next one, humility. Now, we all kind of grasp humility, and the idea behind this is not just you think low of yourself, but that is kind of the Greek main root. Here, I'll go back to kindness. Humility. Let's click on humility. We can scroll down. And the root here is humiliation of the mind. Fair enough. But when you break the words apart, tapainos and phren, phren means mind, but it literally, when you go to the root, I guess I could click on it just so that we can get there. So you have low of mind, but the mind wasn't necessarily caught up in the brain in ancient history. Here we find midriff. Midriff, as in underneath your chest and above your bowels, that's something in there. This is actually where we get our word diaphragm from. I won't go through and scroll and find it so that you can see it, but you can trust me. This is the phren part is the diaphragm within the ancient kind of medical terminology. So not only are we supposed to be humble people, that we should have humility, and underneath humility is thinking less of ourselves. Yes, we grasp that, but somewhere in there, the practicality is within your body. Remember, he goes from bowels. Now he's going just up a little bit to the area of the diaphragm that we know, if you are a singer, that this is the area in which you sing from, not just from your lungs or something. But when you breathe in, you can breathe in, and that diaphragm muscle helps you speak. And so if your diaphragm is low, you are not constantly speaking about yourself. A practical way to see humility is that your mouth is not talking about you all the time. This is something that you continually see within the people that talk about themselves in the third person is kind of a joke, but at the same time, not a joke. Humility is not doing those things. It is bringing low that diaphragm, that your voice is one that is for others and not just yourself. Moving on to gentleness. I won't even jump into the Greek side of it. Well, maybe I will. That we like gentleness, and most of the time when we think of gentleness, we think of timidity, that we are very small and like a mouse is gentle, and that is not the idea here at all. It is really the word that means to be meek in the Greek. When we look at it, you can see that it is meekness, mildness, but when you continue to scroll down and you get the actual root, meekness as in gentle strength, which expresses power with reserve and gentleness, that it is a, we could say, gentle force, that there is strength in reserve held back, that Jordan Peterson uses this in a great illustration where he says that in order to be a good person, specifically he gears it towards men, that's the predominant area of his audience. He says, you must become a monster and then learn how to rein it in. And he uses monster in the positive rather than the negative, that you are a bad person. But you should have strength of mind, body, character that is not just timid and weak, but something that is held back for the sake of those that are the beloved. That here, not only do we think about our compassionate nature on the inside of our bowels, and the kindness which is useful, and the humility which is not speaking and thinking so much of ourselves, all of these kind of a practical kind of bodily sort of words. Here, what we find is then you should be able to be something that is strong and not weak, but hold it in check. Okay, and patience. Patience here, I really like the Old Testament Hebrew kind of idiom that it speaks of the Lord being patient, often in the English, and then in the Hebrew it'll say, and the Lord was long of nose, like Pinocchio, that his nose was long. And I think there's two kind of good things here. Is long of nose was an idiom for them that they were patient people, that you would not have, I think the Greek more intentional here is that you are not short of fuse, that you are not short in passion, that your passions have a long fuse is the idea. And the Old Testament way is the Lord is long of nose, and what do you do with your nose? I'm a little sniffly, but you can hear it, that you breathe in through it. The idea is if you want to have passion, you need to put a breathe right strip on and be able to take a breath and not be so quick to be passionate and that your fuse doesn't immediately go off. Paul is using these things in a great way, that he gives them these things. Here are the things you put on: gentleness, humility, kindness, compassion, and patience. And then he gives them okay, here's how you actually relate that in life, in action, to the rest of the body. Bear with each other and forgive one another. I'll just pause right there. The Greek uses participles in here, which we would translate as bearing, forgiving. And bearing here is activity that you are doing, that it is something you are doing, not just, oh yeah, bear with one another, but you are bearing one another, that you are, the idea here is bearing a load, kind of like you think of in Greek mythology, the Atlas stone, and he's holding it on his back, that our responsibility to those around us is through compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, that we are then bearing the weight, the burden, all of those things of those around us. This should bring us back to Jesus's illustration of take my yoke upon you, that it is a yoke is rarely one-sided, that it is for two, if not more, to bear the weight of something that is a burden. So it is, in order to accomplish this together, we need to bear with each other. We need to be bearing each other's struggles. And then he moves right into forgive one another, forgiving one another. I'll go to the Greek so we can see. Here you can see the participle ending bearing each other and forgiving each other. Now, the thing to notice here is I'll click on forgiving because this is a big one. It is the root of this word is charis, which is the word grace in Greek. Grace in the theological context as opposed to mercy. Mercy is restraining something that you deserve, be that in the negative sense. You deserve a punishment and I will restrain that. Grace is a gift that you are given that is simply a gift. It is not something that you did in a transaction or a way to earn or any of those things. It is granted to you. Now here, what we are doing is, if you haven't put it together, that the participle inging, ing, we are gracing one another, that we are granting grace to one another, that just as God gives us grace, we then precipitate that out towards the rest of the body. And here, Paul is, I don't know if it's overtly intentional, but I would believe that it is, that he is referencing within their group of believers, not just granting grace to everybody outside. Because once you are in, you have taken off these things and continue to take off these things and put on these other things, compassion, gentleness, patience, etc. But with one another, within the community of believers, we are gracing, forgiving one another. And when? If any of you has a grievance against someone. If there is a grievance in your midst, you are people that grant grace. This is hard. Hard. And I would guess that this is the hardest of all of the things. That's why Paul brings it towards the end of the list. That if we can continue in this place of daily putting on compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience, if we're bearing the burdens of each other, that means that we are rubbing off on them. It will be easier for us to forgive when a grievance comes up, when a struggle comes in between us. He continues to give them the example, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Now, blanket statement there, that's pretty straightforward, doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. But what we should grasp is you are not forgiving for yourself. You are forgiving because that is exactly what the Lord does. You are forgiving because that is the character and quality of Jesus himself, of God the Father himself, of the power of the Spirit in our lives. We are to be forgiving people. And over all of these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Unity is brought together like a belt or a girdle by love. Paul is contrasting all of the philosophers of his day, where there are plenty of lists between Aristotle, Plato, all the different philosophers that will have you need to put off these vices and put on these virtues. And then they usually push them to the, you need to reason your way to this because it's the right thing to do, or you need to discipline yourself, like the Stoics would have and other philosophers, that your discipline and your ability to do it is going to be the thing that gets you there. And Paul says it's not that. It is love. Sacrificial agape love that actually brings it all together for us in the body of Christ. Paul uses this. This should sound familiar between Galatians and Ephesians and Corinthians, especially Corinthians 13 and the love passage, that he brings all of these things together through the power of love. And what we know furthermore as you get into the epistles of John, and that God is love. So how is it all brought together? It is through the mental, emotional, theological, physical act of love, the power of God in your life. What we would probably, a good theological way to say this, or a pastoral way, is the activity of the Spirit in your life. The Spirit brings all of these things together. Okay, Paul continues, verse 15. I'm going to look back at the Greek and see if this is an and or therefore. Put on love. Upon the peace, perfect unity. And, okay, good. Yeah, there is a chi. Chi is the Greek word for and. I assumed that there was, and they just leave it out in the English. They leave out, and connecting it to the previous section, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Is it actually hearts is the question. And the peace from Christ let rule in the cardias, hearts of you. Here we find Paul is saying all of these things, peace comes and brought into unity because, remember, I mean, maybe I should have said this during the forgiveness passage. This is the same area in which he is dealing with Onesimus the slave and Philemon the slave owner in this area of Colossae. And so as he's approaching this has to be in the back of his mind, thinking, I need to be able to kind of wet the whistle, moisten the palate, get them ready for what's coming, because he also writes the letter to Philemon about how they can deal with Onesimus and their relationship together. And all of these things, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. Peace, you should hear shalom from the Hebrew context of completeness, not just, oh, things are going good, in the opposite sense of Roman peace, pax romana, that it is not just peace from the Roman world gives us peace because they fight all the enemies away and give us roads and some water and all of that sort of thing, but that there is a completeness found in our body, not just our physical body, but also Christ's metaphysical body of the church. The believers, the beloved, are the physical body on earth in this world right now. Peace comes through this body. And be thankful. Paul continually brings up thankfulness over and over and over and over again throughout this letter, that we should be people that are overflowing with thankfulness. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you, I'll pause at the as you, the message of Christ as in the thing that was brought to you. Was it Epaphras? I think it's Epaphras. I got to remember back to chapter 1, that brings them the gospel message that Paul and all of the other apostles are coming around. Let that message be the thing that rules within you. Let that be the thing that dwells in you richly as you teach, admonish. Here you're getting practical thoughts that here you need to know these things. Here you need to build one another up. Let the message of Christ be the thing that teaches and builds you up together, that as you admonish one another with all wisdom. Now, wisdom is a big word within the Greek context. It's not as big of a word in the Hebrew context, though it does get some prominence when you're talking around Solomon and the Song of Solomon and the Proverbs and such. But here Paul is saying, as you are gathering together, once you have gotten dressed and put these things on, when you are together with each other, gathered as the body of Christ, we do this on Sundays for those of us that are active within the church or a congregation. You need to do it through wisdom and admonishing and teaching. And then he says, psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. Psalms, you should hear the book of Psalms and the Old Testament. The idea behind this word in the Greek is that psalms are songs that are accompanied by a plucked instrument. So not necessarily like a piano in our days in many churches, or maybe more contemporary churches, you have guitars, which is probably a little closer to what the biblical intention was. That here we have music coming and accompanying along, instrumental music, accompanying words that come out. So we have psalms, we have hymns. Now, when you think of hymn, I would not go so far as to think of the hymnal in front of you, that it means you have the Psalms in the Old Testament and then the hymnal in front of you. That's not what this means. It means those that are not accompanied with things. That think about some of the most powerful times during worship is when you get to that moment and you start to sing the doxology without the piano or the guitar or anything. It's just a cappella. These are the idea behind hymns. Songs from the Spirit here, these are ones that are not written down. These are things that are the outpouring of the Spirit's working in your midst as you gather together. And all of those things, you're singing to God with gratitude. With gratitude. Many times we do it out of duty, or I just like that, but there is something that inside of you cries out to the Lord, being grateful. I should say also, if you are gathering together as the body of Christ and you are not singing songs, or you are of the typical anywhere from like 20s to 40s range of adult male, you typically don't like to sing. And you're like, you kind of move your lips around. Paul is saying, when you gather, you should be singing. You should be singing. Okay, that's enough of that. Just a little soapbox moment. And whatever you do, whether in word or in deed, not just the things out of your mouth, but the body that you have physically doing things, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. This is a great place to cap it off, that Paul is saying when you are taking off the old things, putting on the new things, working that out in the midst of your believing body, just remember it is always for the Lord. It is always giving thanks back. When we do that, we will be people that have a superabundance of thankfulness, and it will spill out if we are thinking back to a couple of weeks ago. Okay. We are probably over like 30 minutes now, and I try to keep these a little shorter. That is Paul's put-ons. We will need to know the take off, put on, in order to make our way into the instructions for a Christian household. We're talking wives and parents and slaves and masters and husbands and all of these things, because Paul will immediately jump into, if you are doing these things in your midst, where is the most practical, life-applying place that this will happen? Right in your home. Right in your home. So, we have covered a lot of the book of Colossians. Thanks for sticking with it thus far. We are good through verse 17, that we are trying to be people that underscore, exclamation point, super duper underline, that we are putting on, we are clothing ourselves with things so that we can live into this perceived and theological body of Jesus here on earth. All right, that'll do it for this week. Until next week, we will look at the end of chapter 3 and the very beginning of chapter 4 of the book of Colossians. Bye, y'all.